Before we get to where the Hurricanes are, you were in Columbus for the Stadium Series game. You experienced Four Nations. How about this run for the National Hockey League over the last month? Could they have put themselves in a better light in terms of appealing to sports fans?
Well, there's some good, well, I don't want to say good luck, mitigating circumstances involved, let's call it,
Sure.
in some of this stuff. Like, obviously, the NHL, when they planned Four Nations, didn't realize the international tensions that are inherent between the USA and Canada. They certainly didn't realize that the Kachuk brothers were planning on, having 3 fights in 9 seconds to start one of those Canadian games to really get the crowd going. But I will give the NHL credit for 2 things. The first is the secret sauce for the Four Nations tournament was that people tuned in for the USA-Canada rivalry, and they tuned in after they saw the fights. They stuck around because they saw the game being played at the highest level it could be played.
Yep.
And the smart thing the NHL did was get ahead of the Olympics in presenting the first opportunity for Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews, the Kachucks, Cale Makar, all these guys to represent their countries in a best-on-best tournament against each other. And I think that's the why you saw what we saw in that tournament was these guys had this pent-up anticipation for several years and finally got their shot. I also have to give the NHL credit because, Columbus is not really one of our most successful markets. Let's just be honest, right? Like they don't have a lot of sustained success on the ice.
Right.
It's a market that always seems to be, moving towards success, but isn't quite there yet. But they put a game at Ohio State. They put Detroit in the game to get some of the Michigan, rub from that rivalry. But it ended up being, I would say, being on site, 85%, 15% Blue Jackets fans. It was a moment for that fan base to really flex. And I think the NHL was really smart putting that game there and had faith that community was going to rally around it. And it was a really, really important and impressive moment for Columbus hockey. That was a Blue Jackets crowd that filled that 94,000 seat stadium.
Look, it was on top of the fact that, Detroit is also a good – Columbus has played great. We've seen them against the Hurricanes a bunch. The Blue Jackets are no joke. The way they're playing, I certainly believe that they will be in the playoffs, although they're certainly not guaranteed. In fact, the entire Metropolitan Division beyond Washington seems to be in a little bit of a – I don't know. It's in like the wash cycle of your. We have no idea how it's going to play out now. Columbus is just 4 points behind. Actually, 2 points behind New Jersey. I think. 4 points, 6 points behind the Hurricanes. So they're 4 points behind New Jersey. Detroit's right there. Both of those teams are in wild card positions right now. The Rangers also climbed back into it. But talk to me about the Red Wings in the 2025 calendar. 15-6-2, because they did lose to Columbus the other day in the outdoor game. This is a good team with, like, Lucas Raymond is a star, obviously a great player he played for Sweden in the Four Nations. The only thing I think that is somewhat shaky about them is that their goaltending is not amazing, but that kind of puts them in a lot of, the category of the Hurricanes and the Devils at this point. What do you like about the Red Wings?
Well, and the goaltending, which has been okay, I think, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
I think the coaching change that they made to Todd McClellan is really what you do if you don't have faith in your goaltending. That guy has the reputation of going to different places, L.A. being the last stop, and his system can insulate goaltending that on paper isn't really that spectacular. So that's, when they made that move, it made a lot of sense so far as why you bring him in to solidify things. And he certainly has righted the ship there, as you noted. The Red Wings have, climbed back into this thing in a really impressive way. They've got some pop. I got to say that, like we were talking Four Nations before, I've never been more impressed with Dylan Larkin than I was in that Four Nations tournament. That guy really opened my eyes to his possibilities as a player. Maybe it gets obscured a little bit on some decent to mid Detroit teams during his career, but he's really, really good. Overall, not in love with their depth. Wouldn't shock me to see them make the cut, but the Blue Jackets are such an interesting story, and they just seem to be continuing to push forward and not slide back like many of us maybe expected. And the Rangers, despite all their struggles this season, were always the team that I thought was going to make the playoffs. I mean, the goaltending is better than anybody else has on the bubble. Their offense is even better now that they made the JT Miller trade. Their power play can carry them for weeks when it's clicking. So Detroit's a little shaky. I'm pretty good on the Rangers. And Ottawa is another wild card there, where week to week it's either looking like a playoff team or looking like they're going to be back in the lottery.
Greg Wyshynski, ESPN, is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. All right, to the Hurricanes and their situation. I appreciate it. I mean, the trade deadline is Friday. It's reality, right? I'm not shying away from this. I mean, it's the team I cover, and I'm pretty close to the situation. And Mikko Rantanen has been, I think, good, but I don't believe he has been great since he has been here. And the Hurricanes have been okay. Certainly not great. The offense has been really missing, not just with Rantanen. It was kind of missing for the last month. If you did the breakdown, first 30 games, next 30 games, that happened long before Mikko Rantanen got here. Hurricanes are scoring 2 goals or fewer in half of the games since they passed the 30-game mark. But what do you think the chances are that Mikko is not on the roster Friday afternoon?
So let's have a conversation about this, because I'm curious about your take on this too.
Okay.
I can't wrap my brain around the idea that they made this trade for a negotiating window with Mikko Rantanen.
Agreed.
Like, I feel like they made this trade because just like they made the Gensel trade last year, they know inherently that this is a team that plays to the margins in the playoffs and is a team that is in one goal away, as you and I have talked about for many, many years, one goal away in many games from breaking through and playing for the Stanley Cup under Rod Brind'amour. And so Gensel, his pedigree was as a playoff scorer. Rantanen, last, 6-7 years, has been one of the best producers offensively in the playoffs. And so you've made 2 trades that seem to address the Achilles heel of this team in the postseason. So then to turn around and kind of like sell 75 cents on the dollar Mikko Rantanen for pieces that don't have that pedigree doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And honestly, expecting a guy who had his absolute world rocked the way that he did less than 2 months ago to have certainty on where he wants to be for the next 8 years of his life, I think is also a bit naive. And the fact that he's not there yet is frustrating, but it shouldn't be the reason you cut bait with him. But the conversation I want to have with you is like, I don't believe any of this stuff.
Okay.
But what percentage do you put on it as far as its viability of them flipping Rantanen to like the LA Kings at the trade deadline?
All right, so I will get to that in a second. Here's the thing: when they made this trade, I thought from the very beginning it was mischaracterized by so many in the national media. I never for 1 second thought that it was an all-in move on this year. I talked about it as a move for the future as much as anything. But I do think that over the last, because it's now been about 5 weeks since it's actually 6 weeks, I think, since Blockbuster Friday. I think Friday is 6 weeks. And I think the Hurricanes have to answer 2 questions. Are they contenders to win the Stanley Cup this year? And my feeling is that they're a second-tier contender. I don't know how you look at it, but and if they're a second-tier contender, if they believe that they can't re-sign Rantanen, then I think the best move is to move forward without him. So I'll just that's just my feeling on where we are. I don't know any of this to be that they can't sign him or not. It will definitely not be about money. It will only be about whether or not he wants to be here. They are Correct. Flush with cash. And they have already presented it to him a contract in excess of $100 million over 8 years based on what the reporting is. So I don't know if that answers the question kind of roundabout, but I do think there is a chance if they believe they can't re-sign him, like if he has told them, and I have no idea one way or the other, that, look, I'm going to July 1 regardless. And if they don't believe that will get them, Rantanen at the end of the day, then I think that there are pieces to this team that they can't address. They can't address goaltending. They can't address what has become a pretty average blue line, and that's with Jacob Slavin playing at as high a level as he's played. I don't know that they can address, and to me, that's the reasons why I don't believe they're a top-tier Stanley Cup contender, because they're not scoring 4 goals a game even when the offense comes back. And that's what they were doing for the first 6-7 weeks of the season. They were scoring 4 goals a game. It made all the other problems go away. When you're scoring that much, even at their best, they're probably between 3 and 3.5, and they haven't been that in 2.5 months. So I don't know if that answers the question.
I know it does, and the fact that you've given it any oxygen means that I think there's a possibility of happening, because you are, of course, a very plugged-in man. But I will say that. But I'll say this: if they're concerned about the blue line, and they're concerned about the goaltending, I mean, back to napkin. I mean, they're going to have well over $16 million in cap space with Orlov, Burns, and Freddie coming off the cap this summer.
Yep.
So I mean, they're going to have the flexibility to get younger and get better. If the idea is trade Rantanen in some place where maybe you can get a goalie, I guess that makes sense, because those types of players are harder to come by. And if you have an asset like that and you can pry someone away from a team that's really good, maybe you do that. But I guess the thing for me is we're both talking around Eric Tulsky's name on this one, and I think a lot of the reason why people are giving this idea credence is because Eric is playing 8-dimensional chess while we're all playing. Right. We're drooling. We're just drooling on the floor while he plays chess. The idea of acquiring Rantanen and then punting on the season, because essentially that's what you're doing. If you trade Rantanen, you are saying that our team is inferior, and then you come back to, well, why did you go and make the trade then?
Right.
Unless it was all about asset management, and I don't believe it was. I guess you can applaud the pivot depending on what comes back, but optically, it's just it's got to be giving some fans whiplash to have the team get the biggest player available this season on their roster, and then a scant 2 months later, less than 2 months later, be like, actually the team sucks and we're not going to sign him, and here's a new thing we're going to do. It's jarring to have that happen, but maybe that's what happens when you have somebody who's forward thinking and understands what the future's supposed to look like versus an old hockey person who's just going to double and triple down on a mistake they made.
Yeah, and what I think will happen, Greg, and we'll let you go here. I don't think they'll move him. I'm just saying that my guess is that it has to be considered based on their conversations with Rantanen and his representatives. So I don't think they'll move him. But the way I've talked about it is that it's very possible that we're here on July 1 and Rantanen signs elsewhere. And then look, I got no problem with taking a swing with one of the best playoff goal scorers in the last decade. Zero problem at all. And who knows? You and I have talked about this offline. Man, the East looks, at least the Metro side of it, looks vulnerable.
Oh.
Right? Anybody could come out of this side.
When you said second tier, I was racking my brain for a second, who's in the first tier in the league? I mean, even the Caps and Jets, who have been trading first overall in the league all season, I've yet to meet anybody who thinks either team's going to win the Cup.
It's Florida's to me.
I think Florida comes the closest.
Yep.
I think Vegas, depending on what they do at the deadline, could be close. And then obviously you have to give Edmonton their due, although the idea that Stuart Skinner is not going to turn to a pumpkin at some point during the playoffs is a little hard to ignore. So you're right. I mean, that's the other part of this too, is that I do think everybody who gets their ticket punched for the playoffs can at least feel like they've got a percentage chance of winning the Cup this year, because again, maybe Florida's the team that is the big dog on the block, and you wouldn't have to worry about them until the conference final in theory. But everybody else in the league, East, West, what have you, I think has inherent flaws, and and the Hurricanes could be the one that sneaks through at the end.
Again, and maybe the defense self-corrects. Maybe the goaltending gets better. We've seen a couple of signs here and there. I appreciate your time always, Greg Wyshynski. At Wyshynski on Twitter. The trade deadline primer just whet my appetite. Thank you so much, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.